I think it's going to provide a window to paramedics. And I know this is the thing that the AI is going to be able to find out where there's conflicts in your records. Maybe you did something here and you document. It's going to tease that out now without somebody manually having to find it. And then all of a sudden you get penalized because of either a lawsuit or some type of audit where they're clawing back millions of dollars from you for something that AI could have caught.
Thanks for carving out some time, Asbel. Appreciate you joining us here at Wave. How's the conference been so far?
I will tell you, I've been to several of these, and the tenor of this conference is really a lot. It like change, anticipation. I guess that's the biggest thing that I can say. People are very open to change. There's a lot of change, and I think that's actually set by the political environment going on. There's a lot of change happening. But you're seeing it as opportunity. And almost every conversation I'm having with individuals is this opportunity, this change management, this kind of maybe a worried concept, but also like especially the generation that still wants to move through that change is excited about it and some of the technology that you guys are maybe implementing.
What have you heard this week that excites you? What is ESO working on that you think has the greatest promise?
You know what I'm passionate about right now, and that is the longitudinal record. That is probably the thing I'm most excited about. And I'm excited that we now have a system that is EMS data that I feel is now at the table at the federal levels that people can actually marry to outside of other large systems that may not have that EMS capacity. That's what's exciting me the most that I have seen. And you're assembling a team that has integration with all of that. That's really, really important. I have not seen that in the last 2 years. I'm seeing it happen. And I equate that to under your leadership.
Well, thank you. I know you joined us this morning for the keynote panel on innovation. Anything stand out to you or resonate from the conversation this morning?
So I will tell you, bringing in, there was one gentleman that I met for the first time. Of course, I knew Dr. Troutman, but I'm going to call him Dr. Eric because I can't pronounce his last name. But
Eric Exene.
So Dr. Exene, what we should say, or I'll call him Eric as well. Smart, astute man that I believe the way that we get the fire EMS integration in this mobile integrated health space that we're continuing to talk about is going to be led by physicians such as him and the passion that they're doing. And he gave an example that has resonated with me. And so I definitely plan on reaching out because I think there is key pieces that they've done in major hospital systems that show why we fit in that continuum that we do as EMS. And the moment we begin to encapsulate that as a profession, and I'm saying that from the EMS perspective side, and we narrow the window of what we can do, but it's going to be led by physicians like Kim who understand that and can actually talk through that piece of it.
We had some partners on stage earlier this morning, across the industry, outside the industry. Anything stand out from that conversation where we were talking a little bit about the human element, about the change management, about innovation?
Yeah, so I'll tell you, there were probably two people that stood out the most. I'm not going to call them out just because everybody offered something that was, I think, beneficial through the piece. But change management was definitely loud and clear. The uncertainty of change management, the uncomfortable piece of change management, I call it courage in the uncomfortable. That's kind of the conversations we're having now as an industry. And I'm okay with having uncomfortable conversations. And so that did stand out to me. And one individual with a lot of passion, I think he came from the fire side of things, and spoke very eloquently about that change typically is hard in our profession. We generally react versus respond. And a response parameter requires a thought process. Reaction typically doesn't. We've been protocol driven. It's been kind of drained into us from a clinical side of things that it kind of just put that on. But a response does require a thoughtful process and bringing the right people to the table. And it was I was very intrigued by his responses and what he was doing. I think his very fire-centric approach and now kind of moving some stuff into change leadership management, because that's what it's going to take. It's going to take people such as him and others that talked about having those uncomfortable conversations with their colleagues. And then the last thing that I took note of that I actually pinned and wrote down, and I paraphrased it to me, was there was the gentleman that talked about that real change can only happen in humility. And so it really takes humility leadership because it requires me to be retrospective. I've had to do it. I've had to reflect on my own and saying, maybe you were right on a certain things, but the way that you articulated it was wrong. And that's what's really, really important. And that's an uncomfortable conversation that I had to have with myself, and much less the colleagues as we're talking about. But I've learned over the last probably 8 to 10 years after having that is that the moment you become vulnerable and transparent in that, you start talking about it, people feel a license to now start talking about it. And I think that's why it's really beginning to resonate, and this change management and this leadership piece. I've never seen anything like it in the last 2 years. I'm generally a finance guy. That's where my expertise lies. But my most engaging conversation now and the most active solicitation for me to come to speak is on a leadership topic that I'm talking about called Space for Grace. And I've got one topic where I talk about courage and the comfortable. And it's everybody, I'm literally flying out to Arkansas next week to speak to leaders about it. Because I think it's resonating. I think we're starting to tie and marry that maybe our approach to this is why we're not winning in some things as well.
Let's double click on that. You've given a few talks here at Wave. Love to hear about what you've taken away. Love that you're networking and meeting some new folks in the industry. You've talked about the hero and the guide and sort of the role of each. Can you maybe summarize that for us?
Yeah, I'll do it real quick though, because it's a journey I've been on since August of last year. We hired a media firm for our company. And we were 11 years old. And sometimes you kind of look and you kind of plateau in an area. And I'm like thinking, oh, I'm opening up the hood and I'm throwing everything out and I'm going to look at it. So we brought them in and they started taking me through this story branding approach. And they gave me a visual, and it was a 5-step process through story branding. And it talked about, are you the guide and the hero? And oftentimes, if I'm trying to guide someone to a solution, they're going to be the hero, not me. And in EMS, we're used to being the heroes. And we're used to anytime something happens, it's, oh my goodness, look at Fire Rescue 911 came to the rescue, and you get all the media buzz and what have you like that. But in this space where we're trying to show ourselves into the continuum, we may not be the hero. We may be guiding it because the payer's the hero, or the hospital CEO's the hero, or the town manager's the hero, or the governor, or the president's the hero. And that is, you change the whole way that you articulate it. We are doing it in such a way that we're rebranding our total self that we're launching next week. And so my standpoint is it resonated with me that every time I say we talk about that in our group now. Every time somebody says we're in the hero spot, we should be talking about the guide spot. And they were given all that we've heard about, like Nike and others that have done things that where they talk about just do it. That means you're the hero, not them. And those things that you start thinking about, like thinking that's what we need to do. And I found it very interesting that this media branding company said their number one client outreach that's growing the fastest is in the healthcare community.
Interesting.
And I think the healthcare industry is finally figuring out we have a branding problem. And we've not brought in the experts that really understand this piece. And I was given an example at one of the classes that we were talking about with MIH, and I was talking about Facebook. And that when there was that whole piece going on, immediately Mark Zuckerberg and his team employed an entire relational customer media. And it's amazing what has happened in the transformation of the public image and things that we do around that. That's the power of understanding hero and guide. And so that's kind of what, and it has resonated. I'm seeing it and I'm excited about it because I'm like thinking, if we can get ourselves as EMS into the position of being a guide and understanding I'm not the hero when it comes to reimbursement and finance issues, it's amazing what happens for us. It'll be amazing what happens for us.
Well, I think it's timely that it seems there's an emerging dialogue in the industry. You spend a lot of time around policy, advocacy, reimbursement. What are you hearing? Why now? What is the urgency that seems to be felt by the industry today?
This is prime opportunity in this administration with what we're seeing the data produce and just merely on the facts of the increased cost in healthcare. It is being noted there's a reason why many of the major tech gurus in the industry are assisting the United States government in understanding how data works. Now, what they're doing is just throwing data out there. And we know it's a window without context could be either detrimental or helpful. And so there's a piece where we know we can bend the cost curve. What is that little healthcare continuum that we're in? That, there's still people that operate in silos. And these are the dialogues that we're continuing to have, Eric, that takes us. You've been having these dialogues a lot longer than I have. And so I've been in it 18 years and I'm like, we're still having the same dialogue. Somebody was talking to me about something. They caught me in the hallway and I'm like, we talked about that in 2012. You actually know we crafted language on that and we had to take the language out because our own industry didn't like it. Now we're talking about it again. In fact, that's fast forward 14 years. So I think there's a window of opportunity. I think it's the same thing that happened to the financial industry back in, I remember going to a conference in Chicago in 2009. And the 5 financial CEOs from the JP Chase was there. At the time, it was Fifth Third Bank, if you remember that, Bank of America, sure. Things like that. And they were talking to a panel with 5 of the major CEOs of the hospitals. And they said, if you guys don't do something, the government's going to come in like they did with Dodd-Frank, and they're going to put downward pressure. And that's the only way that they can get you to change. And that's what we're experiencing now. And so this was backed up by one of my colleagues and friends who was a former DepSec for Trump. And he basically said, that's the way that we know we can get change. We can put downward pressure on rates until we feel that friction is like, okay, the system will collapse. We got to stop and let up. And so I think that's what we're feeling. But we have an opportunity. We're budget dust. We have an opportunity to make a big change to this, but we have to have a unified voice. And then we also have to understand, you and I talked about this, we have to understand where is the space that we cover in the healthcare continuum. That's why we have to be the guide. And if we continue to keep thinking of ourselves as heroes, we think we can come in and take over the whole space. Nobody wants a hero in this space. They don't want you to be the hero. The president of the United States wants to be the hero. So you be the guide. Now you get me passionate.
I do. You mentioned in your little diatribe there, you mentioned data. Why is data important?
Data is the story that we can paint. That is where our story starts. And so we don't use the data. That's where the story starts. And then I can guide people through the clinical side of it. And data can marry all the elements to the clinical outcome. You can then marry it to all payer claims databases, the financial piece of the system or what have you. Then the finance piece comes in. So data and clinical, I believe ESO has that. I've already talked to you about, you've got fantastic individuals on your team, physicians on your team, from Dr. Myers to Rimley Crow to other parts of your hiring. You've got that whole sector. The finance sector is the last piece. And if we can get that piece married together, we will get what we need done and we can paint the story.
You've had a chance to take a look at what we're working on with embracing generative AI to assist field clinicians in reducing the documentation burden. Observations on how that kind of technology can help to support reimbursement for EMS providers.
Slow and steady wins the race with AI. We have a lot of people jumping into it because it's the buzzwords, sexy. But unfortunately, I do believe we're going to have a short-term issue with AI, not ESO, because I think you're doing this very methodically. I'm a crawl, walk, run guy. You guys crawl, walk, run. And to me, there's things that have 100% no risk to implementing. You talked about that today on your panel. I think one of your individuals, I 150% agree with that. Crawl, walk, run. Unfortunately, we have some people that want to jump in because they want to be first to market. They want to throw what they're doing, and there's going to be some unintended consequences. We're already seeing that. It's part of the reason why I developed a tool, an audit tool with 23 critical elements to find that out, because that is going to be the detrimental piece that we're going to see in fraud, waste, and abuse. The Medicare Advantage programs are experiencing that. A lot of people are like, man, can you believe they're upcoding stuff to get? I said, that has nothing to do with them. There's not somebody manually doing that. They have introduced AI and machine learning into that concept they made a mistake, and now they found out the mistake. Okay. There's industry that has been doing this for a while. EMS is moving into it. So how does that work? How does that work with our EPCR capture? I love it. I think it's going to provide a window to paramedics. And I know this is the thing that the AI is going to be able to find out where there's conflicts in your records. Maybe you did something here and you document. It's going to tease that out now without somebody manually having to find it. And then all of a sudden you get penalized because of either a lawsuit or some type of audit where they're clawing back millions of dollars from you for something that AI could have caught. That is what I believe is, if we look at those wins like that in billing, cash posting AI, there's a lot of things you can do from that, from bots, from whatever it is to simplify procedures. Stay away from medical coding. I'm very adamant about that right now. It's becoming a problem within EMS. We're starting to see it a little bit, but it's already been, like anesthesia is seeing major problems with it. Many of them are shutting it down now. There's a reason for it. There's an issue. Until we can get that to capture correctly, take a very methodical process through it. So I agree with your approach. If I didn't, my personality type, I would say, Eric, y'all got to stop doing that. But your methodical approach to AI is smart. But there will be some unfortunate missteps over the next year, 2 years that we're going to have to deal with. But it's going to be companies. I've got faith in large companies like yours. You're not the only one being methodical about it, but you are a leader in this, which gives me confidence to say the periphery we can marginalize with conversations like this.
Yeah. So I hear the affirmation around reducing error, ensuring consistency between discrete data and the auto-generated narrative, and taking a iterative approach to proving out the technology, auditing the technology, so that we're sure-footed as we embrace the change that technology can unlock. You've talked a little bit about your organization, your technology. Who is the Solutions Group? What does the Solutions Group do in the industry?
We're literally a reimbursement company and technology. So think of us working on the front end of a process before a claim goes out the door. So patient's treated, moves into our system, and we can actually help through that process. So we work integrated with your system, Logis, but with a lot of systems. We work sometimes behind systems to just catch, is there something, maybe there's a filter. I like to call it a water filter. It's a water purifier. You have several filters. So that's kind of what we're mainly a technology company, but we have a services arm where we help companies from a reimbursement standpoint look for efficiencies. Specifically now, we're a hot commodity because everybody's trying to figure out how can we increase revenue because we're not getting any new revenue. So there's reductions in costs that we can do. And then we have a new tool that's come out specifically because of my concerns around what AI might do that could be detrimental, to provide a window to individuals who might use billing companies or internal, that they don't know much about the billing side of things. Most people know about the operational and clinical side, but when it gets to the finance side, they're like, I have no clue. And so we've created a tool that can help them at least get an understanding of what that temperature is from their life cycle of a claim.
You do a lot of work around advocacy, EMS policy, certainly reimbursement. For those that may be watching that don't know what that means, can you maybe explain that?
So I'll tell you, I probably have moved more into just being an advocate versus lobbying. I just have a lot of relationships, but from an advocacy perspective, my mind can see the intersection of how great clinical care, great operational design, when it marries with policy, starts to become a problem. We used to talk about that. You can have the greatest idea about policy, but enter politics and it becomes good policy. And so I guess the best story that I can tell is a conversation that I was having with an orthopedic surgeon who is a subject matter expert in AI for for some very large companies, and she lives in Manhattan. And she told me, she said, I've worked in Silicon Valley, here in Houston, she works some. And she says, the one thing that the brilliant individuals that know the technology side of it, she said, the one thing they're missing in healthcare that has become surprising to them is the understanding of the intersection of politics and policy. And we sat and talked for 45 minutes through the process. And so you might see me on a podcast with them talking through that, because I can understand, like, that's a great idea. How do we marry to get to the policy? That's why I'm very interested in what you guys are doing and the marriage of that finance, not just from the window of getting reimbursed, but the window of how can we advocate for correct policy, and what table do you need to be at to impact that change? And so that to me is part of the advocacy that I talk about now on the federal. Now on the state side of it, I understand how the state nuances work. You have to understand the parameters within, understand their viewpoint. I talked about that earlier in one of your sessions about we've got to get into the eyes of the other person, not the way I think, but how do they perceive me? How do they see it? What do they do? That's the passion that you see come out in the advocacy side of it. It's almost like seeing the cliff ahead, and I know that's where you're going, so I'm not going to follow you off that cliff because I see exactly where you're going, but you're not listening. When you become a guide, I have to change my perspective and say, oh, just let him. That's the hero in me. That was the hero side of it, saying, Asbel, you just want to be the hero. But a guide would get out there in front of them and then try to move them away to let them know. And if I'm having to do it myself as a reflection of the industry, you have to put ego to the side, put it outside the door, bring someone else in. That's kind of the construct of where my passion's taken me with advocacy.
Well, I like to say the world was flat until it was round.
Yeah.
And outcomes data has certainly made the world a round place from an industry perspective. I hear you talking about a future in which quality outcomes, understanding the full value that EMS delivers across the continuum can be measured, and policy and reimbursement can be aligned with that. I think that's an important message for those watching to understand is how that data is linked to advancing those kind of conversations. We have a number of shared customers. You get a chance to work with many of the same organizations that we do. We're privileged to support some of the largest, most sophisticated, most innovative organizations in the industry. How do you think those shared customers benefit from working with ESO?
I will tell you that the one thing that I do see with the relationship with ESO that these innovators take is the ability to get access to quality outcomes and what they're looking for. And you're more than just a data company, in my opinion. You also have the ability to take the quality data that they can then marry to some of the advocacy work that they're doing. You also have the ability to merge information to, I'm hoping in the near future, with all claims payer databases, things like that can actually marry and take their data so they can paint that story and picture in their own states with their own relationships that they built in their local communities and on the legislative levels. That to me is what is advantageous. I have not seen yet another data company that allows for that outside of those that may be trying to put together their own data sets.
Right.
As well. But I would like to see more of a partnership with it. That to me, I think with the clients that I have that are very similar that use the ESO, that's the advantage that I see that they do have versus others that might use other companies that may not have that extensive source, so they have to try to get it somewhere else. And it's a little bit more problematic with the puzzle they're painting.
Correct me. You recently chaired the CMS Ground Ambulance Committee that maybe you could give us the full name of the committee that was reevaluating the reimbursement structure for EMS, very much transport focus. You covered a lot of ground. You also parked some issues for a future conversation. Maybe talk to us a little bit about that work as we're now stepping back from it, and maybe what's the challenge or the charge to ESO to help support that work going forward?
So I'll tell you where the biggest challenge was, and this is the reason. This is kind of what sparked my interest into really getting back into the MIH CP space, because literally I had kind of taken myself kind of out of it as we worked to grow our technology company. Is when I was the chairman of the Ground Ambulance and Patient Billing Advisory Committee, what we call GAPBAC. We were charged with making a recommendation to Congress on what to do with the current payment system around no surprise billing. So to get patients out of the middle, because we're in EMS, and there was a big issue with that when the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2018 was passed. In that conversation, as we started having subcommittee meetings, community paramedicine came up. Mobile integrated health came up. And when we had the dialogue first start about it, our own industry couldn't really agree on the definition. And that was an interesting construct with me. And the other stakeholders that were on there that knew nothing about EMS, so think about the stakeholders from labor and HHS, and we had academia on there, and we had insurance plans on there. They did not understand it. So I parked it. And I said, we're going to make it a finding, present information, because there were several people that had worked a lot on there. We actually came up with a definition and coalesced around a definition. That was interesting work when we were coalescing around definitions within our own industry. So that provided a window into me. If we don't know who we are and we still cannot define who we are, how can anyone else understand who we are? And instead of looking at this as like, well, we want it to say this and we're putting lines in the sand, we've got to have uncomfortable conversations as an industry to say, we would be confused ourselves. And this is where I think ESO and the data starts to come in. When we started to ask for data, it was very anecdotal at first. We had to get NMSIS, which was the most comprehensive data set that we could have that would start the dialogue. This is where I started asking questions. And I started understanding where are the people with high tech? Who's doing there? Like, who's at the table? And so I started reaching into my friends that I have at Socio and others. And they're like, well, no, they kind of told me who the companies were that they were talking to and who were at the table. I'm like, that's where I started to get engaged. That's where I started reaching out to. I think you were one of my first phone calls I made, Eric, about that and said, what are you doing here? Because I knew if we were not at the table, as I say, we'll be on the menu. And that is not where I want to be. I'm a table guy. I want to craft the menu. I just don't want to be on that. Or at least I'm going to try as much as we can. I think that's really important. And I think that's where ESO can come in. And hence the reason why I'm getting really passionate about this piece of it, saying, who's the data company that can do this? We know there's a lot of people out there doing it. How can we coalesce around that? If you can take charge, coalesce around it, get it moving forward, it's going to work. The clinicians, the doctors will lead this conversation. If we want to get change and be a part of that continuum for mobile integrated health and healthcare from that piece of it, the doctors will get it done. And personally, from my perspective, I'm going to use as much influence as I've crafted to be able to move that conversation from the doctor's point of view. I'm not going to be out the one talking about it. I may use a podcast to do that. I may get on shows like this to do it as well, from your standpoint to add, but the doctors will win. So that means Asbel has to set ego aside, sit down with the doctors. Let's talk. What do you need? What can I provide you? How can I help you? And that's what I hear from you, Eric, is how can ESO help move this in the right direction? In my opinion, that attitude right there is what we need to see. And that to me is why I'm engaging in conversations with people like that. If it's to protect a fiefdom, is to protect something like that, I'm not your guy. But if it is really from that standpoint of doing what my parents have always taught me, this is what my dad taught me from the time I was 7 to 8 years old. Son, always pursue what is right. And as long as I pursue what is right, everything else will follow. Sure, there's going to be competition. But this truly is the rising tide lifts all boats. See, there you got me passionate again.
Absolutely. And, we see that as a key part of our mission. The ESO Data Collaborative really was meant to build a data asset that could be used to advance the conversations that the industry needs to drive improvement at scale. So appreciate your passion, and passion is one of our core values. We love to embrace that and see that in our partners. Maybe one final question. How did you, for folks who don't know you and haven't met you, can you give them your short history? How did you come to the industry? How did you get to EMS? How did you end up where you are?
I don't think most people know this, but in 1998, I was living in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I was working for a payer at the time called United Medical Resources, or UMR. And my brother-in-law pastored a church in Kernersville, North Carolina, and asked me to come be his music minister because I played piano. And so I just upped and moved, and I landed a job because I had to work also part-time, and I landed a job working for EMS management and consultants. I think I was their 9th employee or 10th employee at the time. They weren't as large as they are now. And that's kind of how I got started. I started to see that. And my dad had always told me, son, jack of all trades, master of none. And I just said, okay, this could be something I could specialize in. I just started seeing like, this is the finance. I could see some of the like nuance and inner workings or lack of. So I just applied and said, I'm going to become an expert at everything reimbursement. And that was the only job I ever applied for. I eventually got out of music ministry because I didn't enjoy being paid for it, because it didn't seem like a ministry to me anymore. So because music is a hobby and I love music. And so then from there, I was just recruited across, ultimately worked for a very large company that was headquartered in Louisiana called Acadian Ambulance Service, pretty fantastic ESOP company. Did a lot of stuff in the political world for there. And then my business partner and I started a company called Solutions Group back in 2014. And I eventually left and transitioned from Acadian after 11 years and went full-time as a co-founder of Solutions Group. And so we're having fun now. We're growing. I'm involved in outside of just EMS, but do a lot. We do a lot in the healthcare continuum. We have a lot of clients, but mainly in the professional services side of it. So think, anesthesia, radiology, urgent care, things like that. Moving into the hospital partners is a little daunting at times, specifically as we continue to grow. But this is our year that we're working those relationships. We're excited about that piece of it. But overall, we're a technology company. I'm involved in this advocacy piece because it's a passion. And that I know is purpose and passion, and I can see it. So really people ask me, what does it do for the technology side? Inadvertently, I guess everything helps a company from the advocacy perspective, but this is just a passion. I'm like, we have a window of opportunity. And if you can see something to not say and talk about it, and are you comfortable talking about it? And I just realized the older I get, Eric, my mom and dad always told me that, son, you're going to get to a point where you just don't really care what people think anymore. I think we always care what people think, but I'm okay with having those uncomfortable conversations in a manner that I hail from North Carolina. So I'll try to do it as nicely as possible as well, and do it, like we say, with grace. My dad always says, son, you should speak the truth, do it with love, seasoned with salt. That's what he did. My dad was a pastor, so he always gave me make sure you can taste your words. So
there's some wisdom there, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you for your advocacy for the industry. Thank you for being at WAVE, and thanks for carving out some time today to chat.
You bet. Thank you, Dr.